Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great Player. Well, I decided to look back at the games that I've run in the past and try and identify just what it is that makes for a great game. What was it that made those games so memorable? And the thing that kept coming up time and time again was that for me, as the game master, the thing that made the games that much more interesting, that much more exciting, that much more stand out was the players' characters and how the players interacted with the games. Not how the players' characters interacted with the game, that was already fantastic, but how the players interacted with this game. And so that's inspired today's video, which is, of course, how to help your GM as a player. So how to help out your GM as a player. And it's not prepare and know your spells and that sort of thing. That's a given. That's how to be a good player. We're talking about how to help your GM. So these are the ideas that I've come up with. What do you think? Leave a comment below if you've got more ideas on how you can help your GM or whether you should help your GM or not. I personally feel that we're all in this together, so the more help we can give each other, the better. Now, by helping your GM, and I'm not to imply here that your GM is a poor GM or needs help. Maybe she is one of the greatest GMs out there, but sometimes every GM needs a little help, or a little reminder, or a little push, or a little support. This is about how to do that in such a way that you keep the game flowing and that everyone has fun, which is the ultimate goal. So, if we look at the first item on my list, if it looks like a plot, grab it. This is a bit of metagaming happening here, but if your GM is giving you something, take it. Don't avoid it. I know that you might have your own quests that you want to follow, and maybe those are more important. And you'll find that you can do that later on in this video. But if the GM is giving you a plot hook, a little girl comes running up to you and she asks for help, don't necessarily walk away from it straight away. Think about the session. Have you ended an adventure recently, and so perhaps your GM is trying to create a new adventure for you to start on? Well, that's their job, is to give you adventures, isn't it? So if you avoid all the plots they throw at you, all you're being is difficult and not really playing the game. So if it looks like a plot, follow it, see where it goes, you never know. And the beginning of a plot might seem or might be very different from how the plot unfolds. So when the little girl comes running up to you saying she's lost her puppy, don't roll your eyes and go, oh, it's another search quest. No, I don't want it. Because that puppy is actually an alien that's been in disguise on the planet for the last 3 years, has gathered all of its information and returned to the mothership, which is about to attack. It left a secret room underneath the house that was full of transmission materials, and there's a countdown clock on it. And the players have to stop the end of the world. So that boring little, oh, we've got to go and find the puppy thing, turned out to be something quite different. And you can come up with much better plots on the fly than I can, I'm sure. So don't roll your eyes at plot. If plot is being given to you, grab onto it and find a reason to grab onto it. Having said that, now this is the second point, if there is no plot, if you're struggling to find plot, if you're kind of going, well, I've spoken to the NPCs, I've spoken to them, I've done that, I've done this, and I don't really see the GM throwing us anything in terms of where we should be going, you create it. And there's plenty of videos that I've done on how to go and find and involve yourself in stories by using your character's backstory. So do that. Go and create your own story. Go, well, my character really wants to explore this thing that we discovered, so I'm going to go off and go and do that. Throw the GM a bone from time to time. Let them go, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, I can come up with a quest for that. And then off you go. Now, something that's important to do, and I feel that players who do this know how to GM a lot better than they perhaps ought to, or are GMs themselves. When you say, all right, we've just sat down around the table, no one's prompted what we should be doing this session, and we've decided to go and explore those runes that we came across 6 months ago, and we now decide that that's what we want to go and look at. Have the decency, have the courtesy to go, all right, GMs, that's where we're going, but for now, I want to talk to the rest of my fellow players' characters. Create a dialogue that lasts for about 30 minutes or so, whilst you're busy chatting to each other, planning, plotting, and don't interrupt the GM. Let her now spend 30 minutes coming up with that adventure in those ruins that you wanted to go and explore, because she didn't have that planned. She couldn't possibly have anticipated that you remembered the ruins that she described on the hill 6 months ago. So give her a little bit of time, or give him a little bit of time to prepare the adventure that you've now created. It's just common courtesy, at least in my opinion. Right. Now, you have a character page that's full of statistics. It doesn't matter what system you're playing, you will have some kind of skill set, some kind of system for creating dice rolling mechanics, and even if you don't have dice rolling mechanics, you'll still have character backstory, whatever. Somewhere along the line, you will have character information. Take that character sheet and try and use everything on it. Far too frequently, I see players who have a fighter or a particularly muscular character, and they never go anywhere near their other skills that involve the intellect or charisma or charm and things like that, because, oh, I'm the hitty character. Well, that's fine, but you are letting yourself down. So how does this help the GM when you start to use other stuff? When you start to use things that you're not good at, or things that are obscure? If you have on your character sheet philosophy, and you go, well, I've never used philosophy, but, well, I'm going to try and use it. Try and come up with inventive ways of using your skills and your abilities, and then throw them to the GM. Trust me, the GM will appreciate the fact that whilst you're dealing with a mobster, you want to use philosophy to get the questions out of the character. And the GM might ask you, well, how do you use philosophy to get the character to give you information? Well, now it's up to you to figure out how exactly you do that. It makes the game more interesting for you, and ultimately, once you figure out that, well, with psychology, with philosophy, you can talk about the way that in the old days, man used to believe in this, and then he changed to believing in that, and how you yourself subscribe to the Spartan philosophy, which is if the person is of no value to you after you've captured them, simply kill them. Perhaps that will help and give another player's character an advantage to their intimidation check or their interrogation check. But try and use skills and things that are not normally used and throw them to the GM as options so that the GM can go, well, they haven't succeeded on their usual skill sets, but this is a unique way of trying to use that skill to get information out of the person. You could even go so far as say, I'm using my cooking skill, and I describe how you slowly skin the perfect turkey, and then how you remove the bones so that it's a boneless chicken, and how you can do those to humans as well, including people who are tied to chairs. Again, using your different stats, your different skills that you don't normally use, and throwing them out there for the GM to use and to find ways of incorporating into their narrative will help the GM. It not only help them become a better GM because they now start to open up their minds to the options of using different skills, but it'll also help you have more fun as you try and figure out how to use these obscure skills that no one ever uses. It's a lot more interesting, trust me. Now, something to bear in mind. There are GMs out there who sometimes forget to give their players all of the information. That's what this next section of this video is about. Is sometimes the GM will give you a situation that is actually impossible. It's very rare, and they obviously haven't watched my videos if they do, but there are some times where some things are just impossible, and the GM forgets to tell you. They just keep telling you that you're failing your checks, you can't get your skills right, you can't do this, you can't do that. So sometimes you need to literally ask the GM, is this impossible? Does my character think that there is just no ways we are ever going to get this right? To which the GM might be prompted to remember, oh yes, no, it is, yes, absolutely. Your character thinks there is absolutely no way they will ever get through this. And then accept it. I remember I was a player and I was stuck with a GM who'd allowed us to find a safe in a wall, and we spent an entire session trying to get into this safe, and we just couldn't, no matter what we rolled. Even when we rolled natural 20s on the D20 system, it didn't work. And we as players got incredibly frustrated until after the session the GM said, well, it's just impossible for you to get in there. Why didn't you tell us this beforehand? Well, the GM didn't think that he needed to because we should have realized it was impossible. Or we should have asked, do we think it's impossible? So, something to bear in mind is sometimes the GMs don't necessarily get the picture in their heads that you have in yours. And that leads me to my next point, is never be afraid to ask for clarity on a scene. Sometimes GMs get flustered when players start to make assumptions about scenes that they are involved in and are not seeing it the way that the GM is seeing it in their heads. It can lead to confusion, it can lead to difficulties in terms of the players interacting with the scene and in terms of the GM then trying to retroactively work out how the new scene is unfolding. So never be afraid to ask for clarity. If your GM doesn't use maps, I don't use maps very often, but when I do, I use them usually at the request of my players who want clarity. So clarity is very important. Never be afraid to ask for clarity. Now, you're obviously making notes about every encounter, every name, every ruin, every thing that you come across. It's important for those notes to make sense. There's nothing worse than a player looking down at their page and going, "Who's Gufford?" And everyone looking around blankly, and then the players look to the GM and say, "Who's Gufford?" I usually at that point say, well, if you don't remember, you don't remember. It's not my responsibility as the GM to remember all of the stories that I threw out. So that's something to bear in mind. When you make notes, make sure that you're making good notes. And sometimes you can prompt the GM. The GM might say, "Who the hell is Gufford?" And then as you look down at your notes, you made good notes, you can say, well, remember, Gufford was the name of the blacksmith's son that we gave a pork chop to when we met him on the side of the road. I want to see if Gufford is still working with his father. Sometimes the GM doesn't make very good notes, or there are certain encounters the GM creates on the fly that seem to be once off. Whoever would go back to Gufford the blacksmith's son in that little obscure village that the party literally breezed through. They didn't stop, they didn't have any encounters, there was no significance to the village whatsoever other than it was a place marker on the journey to wherever it was that they were going. Sometimes your notes will help the GM. As much as I hate to say it, GMs are just as fallible as players. Now, whilst on the subject of Gufford the blacksmith's son, another point to look at is to engage NPCs for quests. So whilst you are at the NPCs, you're at the blacksmiths, you say, oh, is there any metal you'd ever like to work with? Do you know of any mysteries surrounding a mine that closed down recently? So prompt your NPCs for quests. Sometimes the GM is having a bad day and they sit back and they go, oh, I have no idea what to do in tonight's session. As the player, you can, with impunity, walk up to an NPC and say, oh, I see you've got a magic shop. Oh, that's lovely. Do you need anything? Is there anything I can go and fetch for you? Any book that you would like? Any obscure piece of arcana that you want me to go and find for you? Well, the idea is there you are again, prompting the GM to create some kind of quest for you, some kind of plot for you. You're giving the GM a bone. You're saying, here is an opportunity for a quest. A good GM should pick up on that immediately and start to create all sorts of wonderful and amazing adventures based on that. Again, once you've spoken to the NPC and they said, oh yes, I remember now, there was this crystal ball that I particularly fancied, but it was rumoured to be lost in the swamp of Ag. Give your GM 30 minutes to go and invent the swamp of Ag and this crystal ball that's been lost in the middle of it. So what do? You engage with your fellow players' characters. You say, all right, well, rest assured, we will restore you to your crystal ball that has been lost in the swamp of Urg. Now, fellow players, how are we going to do this? What do we need? What can we participate? So in other words, you engage your PCs in dialogue that does not involve the GM. Because the GM is busy creating the adventure that you have now helped to kickstart. And then finally, don't let your fellow players distract you. Now, you're engaging your fellow players' characters in terms of what adventure you should go on and what you should do on that adventure and the like. Do not let players who have become distracted or players who are themselves bored from handing you their cell phone and saying, watch this, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I'll watch it after the session. That's all you need to say. Or if you've got a player who's talking absolute rubbish, hey guys, I just want to hear what the GM is saying, so would you mind talking about that later? Or go into the kitchen and talk about it if you're not interested. Anything along those lines. you are helping the GM, because the GM might be trying to get out some information, some sort of message to you, and you've got these two who are not involved because they're in a different scene, or they've been trapped, or they've been split away from the party, and they're not in the scene and they don't want to listen to it. Prompt them to go and sit somewhere else, or just to shut up, because sometimes, well, people just need to be told to shut up. Anyway, I hope this has been useful for you. As you can hear, I'm still battling a little bit with the ongoing viral fiction that I've been struggling with, but nonetheless, I hope that this has been helpful and has given you some insight into terms of how to help your GM the next time you're at a role-playing session, and how to create those memorable sessions where you yourself have been responsible for the kickstarting of a phenomenal adventure, or even in some cases, an entire campaign. Until next time, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of these kind of videos, and remember now you can find your own table. You can find fellow players out there, or fellow GMs out there, or GMs to GM your table of fellow players, or fellow players to be part of a table that someone else GMs. Anyway, you can find groups online now with the new online app, web-based app that the Web Goblin has so meticulously developed and has been releasing now. It's been going for a month, and we've got just hundreds of tables up already of people looking for players and players looking for GMs and such like. And it's for online play, as well as for sitting around and gathering together in a house and actually playing around the table. And that is www.rpgtablefinder.com. rpgtablefinder.com, and there you can create tables, join up, it's all free and everything is absolutely wonderful, and you can search for it, and there's a little bonus in the table finder in terms of it gives you little narratives that you can read and enjoy and share as you might like. But if you want to find anything else, head on over to our usual website, www.greatgamemaster.com, where you can find interesting stuff, free stuff, cool stuff, past videos, previous videos, future videos. Well, maybe not future videos, but you can suggest future videos on our Suggest a Topic page within that website. So until next time, I wish you and your fellow players and your GM the very happiest of playing.